So the first time I wanted to exchange the pushrod tubes on the BMW R80, I ran into a little problem. I took everything apart and then we noticed that there wasn't enough cross-hatching left on the cylinder wall, so I had to take care of that first. Fortunately, I had a friend who could help me out, so I have freshly honed cylinders, cleaned valves and reground valve seats, which I'm very happy about. And I also already exchanged the pushrod tubes on this side, so I can now show you the process on the other side. But to get to this point, we first had to take everything off the bike. And when you do that, it's very important that you refer to your manual, because at some points you need to loosen the screws in a very specific order. But in general, the first step is to take off the valve covers. Then you see the rocker arm. So you need to loosen the rocker arm nuts in the specific order. Check your manual for that. Once those are loosened, I took the rocker arms out. It's important to note which side goes where, so you know how to reassemble everything. And then also the push rods, which sit in a little joint at the bottom, so you just pull them out and also mark those so you know which way they go back in. Once that is done and the cylinder head nuts are loose, you can basically separate the cylinder head from the cylinder if it comes loose. On the other side, that didn't work and I had to pull the cylinder, including the cylinder head, off the bike and then separate those afterwards. But if you use a plastic or rubber hammer, you can give the cylinder head a few light tabs. Be careful to not break a fin and hopefully it comes loose. On this side it did, so I took the cylinder head off. And then the last thing that is on the bike is the cylinder with the piston inside. And for this repair, basically, we can leave the piston inside the cylinder. So what you do is you just slide the cylinder back until you feel the piston and then carefully slide it back a little bit further until the wrist pin is exposed. So you can loosen the circlips. And on this bike, the wrist pins came out super easily, but I watched the Boxer 2 valve tutorial, which I'm going to link you down below. And the guy had to use a special wrist pin puller. So I'm going to also link you that down below, but check that video. And I'm going to link you a few other tutorials for this procedure also down below, so you can have a nice reference for this task. But yeah, once the wrist pin was out, I took the cylinder with the piston still inside it off the bike. And at this point you have to be careful to not let the connecting rod smack into your engine casing. So you put like a towel in here, and then while you work on the bike, you can secure it with a rubber band like this, so it's in the air and it doesn't hit anything. So on the left side, I had all three pieces already separated. On the right side, I had the cylinder with the cylinder head still attached to it, and I didn't really know how I could separate those. So I asked my friend Nikhil and he suggested to put it in a vise like this and then carefully tap the exhaust flange and the intake flange with a rubber hammer. Fortunately, that broke the seal so it could separate the two pieces. So now that we're this far, it's time to exchange the pushrod tubes. And the first step to that is to properly heat up the area in which the pushrod tubes sit. It takes about 3 to 4 minutes with the blowtorch to get this hot enough. Once that's hot enough, there are different ways to get the pushrod tubes out. You can check the other tutorials down below and see which one you like the best. I decided to get the special tool from Siebenrock, which is just like a 15 euros or so, and I think it's well worth it because this fits nicely into the pushrod tubes and then you can drive those out with a hammer. The other options all probably work fine, but you run a higher risk of damaging something and I didn't want to risk that. So let me show you how that works. Once it's hot enough, you take the tool and drive the first one out. Now for the next step, installing the new pushrod tubes, I built this little wooden frame where the cylinder stands on, because now we have to flip it around and it has the two studs. So you need something where it can rest on, and I also put a crossbar here so it doesn't run away and the two beams stay in place. So that's very handy. Before I'm gonna heat up the cylinder for the next step, I'm gonna clean out the area where we install the new pushrod tubes so that is clean. And then I'm gonna take the cylinder and put it in the oven to heat it up to around 120 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure if that is the right temperature. That's the one I'm going with, but I didn't find any information on that. If you know how hot this should be or can be, please let me know down below, because it probably helps someone out. And then I also had the pushrod tubes, the new ones, in the freezer. I pushed some paper towel in here, which I saw at Brooks Airhead's garage tutorial, and soaked that with water. But you still need to leave enough space at the top so you can insert the tool. So the push rods keep the cold a little bit longer. And then wearing gloves also helps for that. So let's go ahead, do that, and then we can put the new ones in. Now, while the cylinder is heating up in the oven and the new pushrod tubes are still in the freezer, I can show you what's important for the next step. The first thing is that I need to apply a small film of high strength Loctite onto the bottom of the pushrod tube, and that secures an oil-tight seal. And I noticed when installing the other two that you actually don't need a lot of this. And when actually applying that onto the cold pushrod tubes, I clean those off before because there's often ice on the outside so that they're absolutely dry. And then once I'm ready to install the pushrod tubes, another thing becomes important, and that is the gap between this edge on the cylinder head and the top of the collar of the pushrod tube. And that apparently needs to be between 1.75 and 2 millimeters. Some say between 1 and 2 millimeters, but I'm gonna stick to 1.75 to 2 millimeters. And for that, 2 of the big feeler gauge plates actually equal 1.78. So I'm using these two and this triangle. So I have a flat edge and then I check the gap like this. But I noticed that you have to work relatively quickly, so checking too often isn't very helpful. You have to drive it in relatively far until you are almost level and then do the fine tuning. Maybe if you heat up the cylinder more, you have more time, but I'm not really sure how high I can go with that. So I'm rather conservative with that probably. So let me check on the cylinder, see if it's hot enough. And then if that's ready, we can install the first pushrod tube. All right, I'm gonna put the cylinder back in the oven for a little while so we can install the cycle. Okay, fortunately that worked out. The last one went in a little bit too far, so I had to quickly flip it around and hammer it back out to get the right gap, but now we're set on that. And while this one cools down, I'm gonna move on and install new seals on the other one. Now the last step is to torque everything down. That happens in 3 steps, and again you need to check your manual because you have to do that in a specific sequence. Now before finishing this up, I'm actually quickly going to set the valve clearance while we're at this point. Unfortunately on these BMWs, apparently this is relatively easy, so I'm quickly going to do that and then install the last missing piece, and then that is another job done. Hopefully that's the last task for the engine and we can continue with the rebuild. I'm very excited for that because now it's getting to the fun stage where you put all of the finished parts back together. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to watch another one, then I'm going to link you one right here. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.